So on October 14th, 1322, you had the Battle of Old Byland. The Battle of Old Byland was the Scots versus the English in Yorkshire. This is part of the Wars of Scottish Independence. And this was the most significant battle since the Battle of Bannockburn, which was 8 years earlier in 1314. And this is with Robert the Bruce versus Edward II. So there's Robert the Bruce as depicted in Braveheart. And then here is Edward II. Edward II. Okay, so Edward II, how Christ-like, right? It looks like, do they all look like Jesus? But actually, when you look at all these different depictions, there's another picture of him. There's another picture of him. What did he actually look like, huh? Who is this Edward II? So for the royalists, they'll defend any and all of the kings because they have a divine right to rule over the rest of us. God ordained them. As soon as one man got in power, then his son, and then his son, and just those bloodlines are the only bloodlines that are worthy of being king. I heard that William the Conqueror's bloodlines traces all the way back from 1066, the Battle of Hastings, all the way till today. And so this Edward II, he's got William the Conqueror blood in him. Now Robert the Bruce, he, was inspired by William Wallace, and he became the actual Braveheart. So in the movie, he had aligned with the English, and he had actually turned on William Wallace. But I guess if we're to make the movie make sense, then William Wallace was actually Robert the Bruce's spirit animal. So he saw how Robert the Bruce saw how William Wallace had fought, and he wanted to mimic that passion. And so this is part of the Wars of Scottish Independence, and he's actually going to secure Scotland's independence for a number of years. So let's talk about the Battle of Old Byland, because that's going to happen October 14th, 1322. So Edward II was in a political struggle with the barons. He had to fight the barons earlier, I want to say Lancaster, and then he's going to do the Great Raid of 1322. So he had fought against the barons, was victorious, and now he was going to lead a campaign into Scotland. Now we're going to take over Scotland. The problem with the Great Raid of 1322 is the Battle of Old Byland. The Great Raid of 1322 is you're going to have this big, massive force. There's different numbers out there, 10,000 versus 8,000. So the English had more troops, but I've even heard 23,000. So Edward II has 23,000 troops marching into Scotland. But because Robert the Bruce wouldn't meet him on the battlefield directly, they're just wallowing. They're just flailing. They get in there, they're hungry, they're diseased. So disease and famine is going to kick in, and then they're going to need to leave, and then they're going to withdraw. So they went into Scotland, and the supply lines from the sea wasn't getting in. So now all Edward II has is a starving and hungry and diseased army. So the Battle of Old Byland, some of the highlights, you're going to have a guy named Richmond and Henri Sully, Grand Butler of France, Sir Ralph Cobham, and Sir Thomas Ughtred, So Sir Thomas, Richmond, Henry D. Sully, the Grand Butler of France, Sir Ralph Cobham. The Scots are going to take all these guys prisoner. They're going to take them prisoner. Edward II was known as being a chicken-hearted. He fled with his personal belongings. They said that he left his baggage and his treasure. He was staying in Rievaulx Abbey, Rievaulx Abbey, and he's going to take off, and he's going to run away. They almost captured Isabella. Isabella was Edward II's wife, and she was fleeing by sea. So they weren't getting any new supplies. They quickly ran out of food. And then the battle is going to start in the early morning of October 14th, 1322, and it's going to last for a couple of hours. The English had invaded Scotland 1296, and so therefore this battle had been raging for nearly 20 to 30 years. Robert the Bruce refused to meet him in battle. Instead of having a pitched battle between the two armies, he let them have no food whatsoever. Robert the Bruce had stripped the land of supplies to deprive the English. In fact, there is a story about the Battle of Old Byland. They were to take the crops and forage and, steal the provisions as they needed as they kept on going. But all they found was one old sickly cow. They found one old sickly cow, and they said that was the most expensive beef that they ever found. They said it cost 1,000 pounds for one sickly cow. 1,000 pounds in 1322 would be considered millions of dollars today. Now, when he was in Scotland, Edward II had destroyed this abbey called Holy Rood. And Rood means cross, so it's kind of the Holy Cross Abbey. And it's nice, these ruins, the Holy Rood Abbey. Let's actually take a look at the ruins. They say it's ruins, but they got these nice, concrete structures. This is the Abbey. This is the Holy Rood Abbey. And this is the ruins, right? Because there's no rooftop on it. They said it was destroyed. But you got walls, you got walls, and then you even got like a little building in the back. So you can see how this was a courtyard. This was a meeting place for Parliament, for the troops. And so this is, the ruins of Holyrood Abbey. And Holyrood Abbey, I want to mention some things, but Edward II is going to, they said that he destroyed it, but it wasn't completely destroyed, but destroyed enough to where they couldn't use it at the time. So while he was in Scotland, he did some damage. Edward II did. It's gorgeous stones, right? Gorgeous mason work. It's actually incredible. Even the little bit that's standing is still, beautiful, and you could see that it could still be a fortress. It could still be used as defense. You could still use it as a meeting place. It's just open air now. You could use it for a walled-off garden. So that had happened in 1322. They said that Edward II had destroyed the Holyrood Abbey, which is in Edinburgh. It was founded by David I of Scotland, like 200 years earlier. But Robert the Bruce is going to hold Parliament there in 1326. So even though it was so-called destroyed in 1322, 1326, he held a Parliament. Robert the Bruce did. That was 4 years later. And then 1328, he's going to sign the Treaty of Edinburgh and Northampton. That's going to end the First War of Scottish Independence. That happened in 1328. Now that's going to be after Edward II was deposed. Edward II, they said, was oppressive and he was terrible at war. He's going to get deposed. Isabella's going to sail off, and then she's going to bring 2,000 to 3,000 troops with her from somewhere. I forget if it was Normandy or something, but Isabella was the wife. And I don't know if Isabella was sent in. There was an earlier event where they sent the wife in, and then they attacked the wife, and they said that they were trying to cause a casus belli, which is Latin for the cause of war. So is that why he sent his wife there? Because he's a coward. But when the wife was doing something with somebody, they attacked her legion, so a lot of her people got killed. She had to run away. Anyways, Isabella doesn't like Edward II, so Isabella goes to another country and raises an army and then invades England, 2,000 to 3,000 people. They're eventually going to capture Edward II, and they're going to put him into jail, and then they're going to elevate Edward III, his son. They're going to make his son king, and then we don't know what the hell happened to Edward II. So it's presumed that he was killed. It's presumed that he was killed. He was put into prison. Edward III became the new king. though he could have just been left to live out his days. So October 14th, 1322 is the Battle of Old Byland. The Scottish warriors were victorious for that battle, and then 6 years later they're going to be victorious with the War of Scottish Independence. So the Scots are going to get their independence in 1328 with the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton. The Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton, and the terms of that treaty, in exchange for 20,000 pounds sterling, the English was going to recognize the Scottish independence, and they're going to recognize that Robert the Bruce was the rightful ruler of Scotland and all of his heirs and successors. So anybody who succeeded Robert the Bruce, his family, and their line of succession were going to be the rightful rulers of Scotland. Later on, they're going to say that that was a shameful treaty or something, and then they're going to continue to invade Scotland and attack Scotland. They also determined a border between Scotland and England. So that was the treaty's terms. The English recognized Scotland as being its own nation, and England also recognized that Robert the Bruce was the rightful ruler of Scotland in exchange for 20,000 pounds sterling. So that's interesting. The war for the Scottish independence, the first war for Scottish independence, lasted from 1296 to 1328. So I don't know what happened, because eventually Scotland is going to lose their independence. So let's see, what else do we have here? Battle of Old Byland. They had no new supplies. They almost captured Isabella. She had to flee by sea. Robert the Bruce refused to meet him in battle. He had stripped the land and supplies to deprive the English of supplies that they could steal. There was another loss for Edward II during the Battle of Old Byland, or during the Great Raid of 1322, so just prior. Adam FitzRoy. Adam FitzRoy was the son of Edward II. They called him the illegitimate bastard son of Edward II. He was 15 years old. So 15-year-old Adam FitzRoy is going to get killed in the invasion of Scotland. So the War of Scottish Independence was ended by the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton. That happened in 1328, but that would have had to have been Edward III. Edward II, 1327, he was forced to resign just 1 year prior. The crown is going to go to Edward III, who was 14 at the time. There was some regents who was going to help Edward III govern his estate, which he was able to. They were able to oppress Edward III for 3 years, so this was during the regents. And then 3 years later, Edward III is going to overthrow the regents. So in terms of the divine right of kings, it makes no goddamn sense whatsoever. Because if we want to believe in the divine right of kings, then how come the Anglo-Saxons aren't still running things? And you want to, the divine right of kings. There is the Romans had occupied England. Then there was the Celtics or the Celtics. So shouldn't it be the Celtics? Shouldn't they still be running things? So the whole idea of hereditary succession is ridiculous, because William the Conqueror came out of Normandy. He was a French Norman. And to think that only the son of the king can be king is ridiculous. Lots of people are capable of being kings, being rulers and effective rulers. Robert the Bruce had signed the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton, so Robert the Bruce is all over the place. When I read history, Robert the Bruce sounds like William Wallace. So in the movie, it seemed like Robert the Bruce was vacillating between sucking the English crown's dick and wanting Scottish independence, even screwing over William Wallace in one of the battles. But I believe that's all the notes that I have right there. So that happened October 13th. This was Edward II right there. Holyrood Abbey. We got several pictures of the Holyrood Abbey, right? Yes, this is what it looked like in its full glory when it had a rooftop. And then, of course, Robert the Bruce. So, Robert the Bruce was victorious. And then here's other depictions of Robert the Bruce.